Kennedy, bound by fate and tragedy. They all loved life, yet each carried a shadow of doom. Maybe it was because the lives they lived weren't really theirs. They were instruments of some higher, unstoppable force. It began modestly, or at least as modestly as the story of a starving Irishman fleeing 19th century Ireland could begin. Patrick Kennedy left behind a land crushed by famine. Ireland was an internal colony of the British Empire. Most Irish hadn't tasted meat or butter in years. Even potatoes were a luxury. In America, Patrick, frail but determined, made a leap. In Ireland, he was third class. In Boston, he climbed to second. He worked as a dock worker and a cooper. He died of cholera after 9 years, leaving behind his wife Bridget and 4 children with nothing. But Bridget Kennedy was unbreakable. She worked hard, saved every penny, and opened a small shop. It was the first brick in the Kennedy legacy. Her son, Patrick Joseph, opened his first saloon at 22. They worked endlessly, scrimped, clawed their way up, and resented the Boston elite, the polished descendants of the first settlers. To the so-called Boston Brahmins, Irish immigrants ranked above Black and Chinese Americans, but only just. Their neighborhoods were filthy ghettos, symbols of rejection. The Kennedy story is inseparable from the Irish-American experience, built on struggle, corruption, and political backroom deals. Irish immigrants brought with them a culture of resistance, secrecy, and tight-knit loyalties, honed by centuries of oppression. In the American democracy, this became a powerful political weapon. Boston was soon covered in Irish political clubs. Immigrants were offered help in exchange for votes. They even used special voter combs, with broken teeth pointing to the right candidates. Some bragged about voting dozens of times in a single election. Patrick Joseph Kennedy, future president's grandfather, thrived in this world. He imported liquor, ran saloons, and invested in politics, knowing that true power lies there. He had what would define the Kennedys for generations: ambition, shameless charm, connections, and a gift for promotion. He handed out corkscrews stamped with his name, a 2-in-1 ad for both his bar and his campaign. Once, when his rivals tried to crash a political convention he controlled, they had to dress as undertakers and arrive in a hearse just to get past his blockade. Eventually, Patrick Joseph made it out of the ghetto and into the Massachusetts Senate, a symbol of Irish ascent. His son, Joseph P. Kennedy, would become one of the richest men in America. Few American figures are as complex or tragic as Joseph Kennedy Sr. He openly admired Hitler, unthinkable in his time, yet could sign a $10 million check without blinking. He outlived his 2 favorite sons, whom he had groomed for greatness. After a stroke left him paralyzed, he wept at the sight of any funeral on TV, convinced another son had been killed. He once called his 9 children hostages to fortune, but he realized too late that hostages sometimes get shot. Joseph made his fortune in banking, shipbuilding, Wall Street, bootlegging, and Hollywood. By middle age, he was worth over $100 million. He loved spending money and women, but he invested just as heavily in people, chief among them, his 4 sons. If one failed to reach the presidency, another would take his place. Inside the Kennedy household, the rules were strange. The family stood united, yet constantly competed. Joe Jr., the eldest, acted as head in his father's absence and bullied the younger kids. John, the future president, was smarter, physically weaker, but more cunning. Their rivalry ran deep. After one violent clash, John needed 28 stitches. It only fueled their competition. They fought in sports, for women, for their father's approval. When John became a war hero in the Pacific, Joe Jr., stationed in England, cried through the night, "I'll show them." Days later, he flew a bomber packed with explosives into Germany. It was an early version of a guided missile. He never came back. After his death, the family's hopes shifted to John. The Kennedys had a strange relationship with death, as if they were drawn to it, flirting with fate. President Kennedy once said he'd prefer to die by a bullet, a chilling prophecy. Robert Kennedy, who would be killed next, constantly put himself in danger, paddling down piranha-infested rivers, walking straight at wild animals in Africa. They all loved life, yet doom hung over them. Maybe they were never meant to live these lives. Maybe they were pawns in a game too big to understand. John lived the life meant for Joe Jr. Charming, athletic, made for the spotlight. John himself had no real love for politics early on. He preferred the life of a wealthy, well-read traveler writing books and enjoying himself. He was also seriously ill, with Addison's disease and spinal problems. He spent time in a coma after surgery and sometimes needed crutches. John was assassinated. His mission left unfinished. His brother Robert inherited that mission, tough, principled, and completely unsuited to the spotlight. Reporters called him an existentialist. He hated compromise, unlike the rest of the Kennedys. He almost seemed to enjoy tempting death. He refused bodyguards, making it easy for his killer to reach him. After Robert's death, the burden fell to their younger brother, Ted. But Ted was broken. The deaths of his brothers left him scared of death, of expectations. He sabotaged his own image, most infamously with the Chappaquiddick scandal. He ran for president late and poorly. The Kennedy magic was fading. The next generation never truly stepped into the spotlight. Instead, they unraveled through drugs, scandals, and tragedy. John and Robert remain the iconic faces of the Kennedy name, forever tied to both greatness and grief. But they couldn't have been more different. John was a slick, charming opportunist, using any idea to reach his goals. Robert was brooding, rigid, and relentless. John charmed women by the dozens, even in the White House. Robert was a loyal husband and had no natural charm. John was a war hero. Robert, a self-doubting son forever trying to prove himself. John was the first president of the TV age. His famous smile did more for his campaign than his father's millions. Bad press shook him more than global crises. Image was everything. Robert didn't care about image. He was driven by conviction. While John compromised, Robert stood firm, sometimes to a fault. Without his stubbornness, maybe there would have been no bullets in Dallas or in the kitchen of the Ambassador Hotel. They were 8 years apart, but entered politics together. Robert ran John's Senate campaign, showing his brilliance as a strategist. The sickly, reluctant playboy and the fierce, meticulous enforcer. Together, they were unstoppable. John knew how to sell the dream. Youth, intellect, wartime valor, the American ideal. He was destined for success. With his charm, the family's money and power, and Robert's ruthless efficiency, he reached the White House. But then what? Where should the dream lead? John Kennedy had a strange gift, turning failure into legend. The Bay of Pigs disaster, failed attempts to kill Castro, Vietnam missteps, he spun them all. He became a symbol of a fresh, young, modern America. And when Lee Harvey Oswald pulled the trigger, JFK became a myth. The Kennedy legacy, always capitalized, had little substance. Just a powerful image. Robert tried to give it meaning. He helped John reach the top. He may have provoked his death through his own crusades. Now he set out to fulfill his brother's dream, but with real conviction. As Attorney General, he enraged Cuban exiles, the mafia, and union bosses, many of whom ended up in jail. As a presidential candidate, he became the liberal hero his brother never truly was. He visited slums and reservations. His speech after Martin Luther King's death was unforgettable. He would have likely won in 1968, but his war with the mafia cost him. He still refused bodyguards, and so he died. After his death, the Kennedys could no longer outrun fate. The family began to fall apart. Joseph Kennedy once called his children hostages to fortune. For his grandchildren, the better word might have been hostages to ruin. But he couldn't say it. A stroke had stolen his speech. Still, he saw what was happening, and it horrified him. John and Robert were driven by memories of Irish poverty and humiliation. Their children, raised as American royalty, lacked that hunger. They came of age in the 1970s, a time of sex, drugs, and aimless rebellion. Jackie Kennedy remarried a Greek billionaire. Her children grew up abroad, well-mannered but distant from American life. Robert's children, however, self-destructed. In Hyannisport, near the Kennedy compound, they wreaked havoc, riding motorcycles, throwing firecrackers, overdosing on LSD and amphetamines, even blowing up part of the harbor wall. Bobby Kennedy's son was caught with drugs and got a suspended sentence. Then he disappeared, riding in boxcars with vagrants across America. Later, he resurfaced, graduated Harvard, became a prosecutor, only to be caught with heroin and sentenced again. David Kennedy became a full-blown addict. He dropped out of college, spent time in psychiatric hospitals. One day, after taking too much again, he was found dead in a hotel room, another victim of the Kennedy curse. Ted Kennedy's son, Teddy Jr., lost a leg to bone cancer at age 12. Ted's daughter, Kara, became addicted to drugs. The family began to crumble, losing wealth, power, and direction. Their last hope was Michael, Robert's son, seen as a rising star. In 1997, he died in a ski accident in Colorado. Just before that, news broke that he'd had an affair with his 14-year-old babysitter. The scandal shattered what was left of the Kennedy reputation. The story of the Kennedys is not just family history. It's a modern Greek tragedy, ambition, power, and crushing expectations leading to downfall and destruction. What force drove them? Was it a curse, fate, or the inevitable price of endless pride and struggle?